So I want to go to Hawaii, like really badly. So what happens when I start planning this trip? Well, I'd be booking flights, I'd be booking hotel rooms, and travel accommodation. In doing all of this, basically I'd just be spending a lot of money. Now let's assume I've been working a steady job and I've got some savings. It's a good thing that I have access to a bank account. Now, with all this stuff and all this booking, I'd want to make sure I wasn't getting scammed. The people I was booking with would want to make sure they weren't getting scammed. So both of us would want some sort of proof of ID. With all these things in tow, I'd be well on my way to paradise. Now what if, instead of living here, in the first world, I lived here? Here, I've just entered the makeshift of a bank that I have available to me, and I hear, "Where's your husband?" They're telling me all of the things that I can't do without a male present, with no money of my own, bank account of my own, let alone proof of my existence as a human being. I am nowhere close to paradise. Now, everyone talks about gender inequality and, oh, it's so bad, but like, why is it bad? Besides the obvious, like, social injustice. I'm going to explain it in terms that most people find particularly impactful. Let's talk numbers. Let's talk monetary value. Gender inequality is depriving communities of wealth. Countries are losing money, and I'm not talking millions or even billions of dollars. They're collectively losing $160 trillion every single year. What's crazier than this statistic is that I'm probably the first, if not one of the first people to tell you about it. This number is made up of loss. Lots and lots of loss in human potential. Women in nearly every country face some sort of barrier to entry into the workforce, which means that in literally any given country, women only make up 38% of capital wealth. This is the future valuation of any earnings of adult citizens in that country. Basically, women don't get to contribute enough to global annual GDP. Now, in an ideal world where women did have an equal stance to men in labor markets, we could add up to $28 trillion by 2025. That's only 5 years away. For context, this number is just slightly less than the combined GDP of the Chinese and US economies. It's huge. It makes no sense that we're wasting this much money. Now, gender inequality isn't an issue, it's an outcome of two very large problems, which I'll be focusing on today, which is a severe lack of financial liberty and economic autonomy for women around the world. Currently, 1 billion women are undocumented. That's 1 in every 5 women. Without documentation, we have no power. Identity and financial independence are what make up our social influence. The only real way to build resilience to shocking events is to have control over stores of value. This is where the blockchain comes in. Using this, we can grant women more access to participate in the economy and more financial independence. How is this connection possible, you ask? Let me know. So using the blockchain, I'm going to be explaining this equation. I'm going to be referring to it quite a bit. So ownership plus participation equals power. So the first part, ownership, has to come about with using some sort of unique protocol of blockchain. And the first one I'll talk about is a proof of work blockchain. The very first one. It's actually what Bitcoin uses. So a blockchain is a distributed digital ledger. And every single transaction that occurs on this blockchain is recorded. So every transaction actually equates to a block of information. This block contains details about the transaction, but also something called a digital fingerprint. And that digital fingerprint is also called a hash. And this block contains a hash not just of itself, but also of its preceding blocks. And this is what creates the secure blockchain. Because if someone were to try to fraudulently change some sort of transaction or details, the hash of the block also changes. And remember what I said about it having hashes of preceding blocks? If one hash changes, then the entire chain becomes invalid because it no longer contains the correct hash of the blocks that come after it. So this is just one mechanism of security. Another example would be Ethereum, which is another cryptocurrency. They use something called the ERC20 standard. Now, the ERC-20 standard makes it so that all of the cryptocurrencies or tokens that are made actually follow a very similar structure. I've actually created my own cryptocurrency before. It's called Unicoin, and this is just a quick snippet of code of my token. So these women can potentially use a proof-of-work blockchain to support and hold all of their documents, their money, with anonymity and autonomy. Now, that was just the first part of the equation. What about participation? How do we get women who are in vulnerable positions to feel comfortable enough to actually engage in a blockchain economy? Well, personally, I think it's made up of 3 different parts: scalability, resilience, and privacy. So all of the unique protocols that blockchain allows us to use can help us with these 3 things. So I'm going to be explaining 3 specific protocols now that will help provide these values to get that second part of that equation. So the first one is DAG-Tech, Directed Acyclic Graph Technology. It sounds really fancy, but it's actually very simple. So it is a blockless distributed scalable ledger. I said blockless, but I'm talking about blockchain. So DAG-Tech can be used in conjunction with blockchain, and it's been done by companies like Nano and IOTA. So this is what it looks like. It's called a tangle. These are squares, not blocks. Let me make the distinction clear. So every square here represents a transaction, and it's connected to 2 other squares. Those 2 other squares then get the name of edges, and these edges are what actually verify the transaction. On a proof-of-work blockchain, miners, who are people who are trying to find that hash that I talked to you about, are paid fees to verify transactions. On this network, there are no fees, which is a huge, huge plus for solving an issue like this one. What's even cooler about the tangle, besides how it looks, is that the bigger it gets, the faster it gets. It's not just, there's a method to the madness here. So as soon as more people use it, the more available edges there are to verify transactions, which means the more it's used, the faster it gets. And this kind of scalability is absolutely necessary for an issue of this magnitude. Now, the second part I'll talk about, which is resilience, can be provided by using PBFT, or Practical Byzantine Fault Tolerance. Again, really scary sounding word, very simple. I'm going to explain it to you like your 3rd grade teacher teaches you about electricity. So a series circuit, if one part of that circuit breaks, then the whole thing is moot. It doesn't work anymore. However, using PBFT, blockchains can continue to reach consensus despite corrupt nodes. It's kind of analogous to a parallel circuit. So if one part breaks, it just reroutes itself, and consensus is still something that can happen on that network. Why is this important? In places of deprived wealth, corruption is already extremely prolific. If we can create some sort of mechanism to fight that and still allow consensus to happen, we're only helping ourselves reach success. Now, the final part of that equation, of participation in particular, was privacy, and this is arguably the most important piece. So this, transaction mixing and self-addresses, are 2 ways that we can provide that privacy. The first part, transaction mixing, will provide privacy for the sender. So let's say I gave you a bag with a marble in it, and I said, I'm giving you a marble. You would know that 1 marble was mine. But if I gave you a bag of marbles with 5 of them in there, and I said, which one is mine, you wouldn't know for sure. That's kind of what transaction mixing does. A sender is able to add random sources of funding to any transaction so that even the receiver doesn't know where the actual funds came from. Because any transaction that happens on a blockchain, on a peer-to-peer network, is announced. So if anyone were to look at it, they wouldn't know where they came from. Now, the second part is to keep privacy for the receiver. So how do you protect the person getting whatever it is that's being sent? So using self-addresses, they can remain anonymous. Like I said, every transaction is announced. And with that announcement comes an address for a public or private address, and as well as an address for the wallet. So that's where the funds are kept. Self-addresses are randomly generated, and they're not accurate. So every single time a transaction happens, a new address is created, and it doesn't reflect the actual location of funds. So that way we keep the receiver private also. I think it's crazy that any connection is possible between blockchain and like a decades-old social issue of injustice. It doesn't make sense, but it's so cool. And I think that with enough awareness and funding, we can literally use the blockchain to block gender inequality. Thank you.